If you're like me, you've probably spent most of your life assuming the negative items on your credit report just had to sit there. I mean, the bureaus are relatively official, reputable, and tied into everything, so there's no reason to question them, right? That's exactly how I used to think until I found the credit dispute process. Today, I want to explain exactly why everybody seems to be using this method to clean up their report, whether or not you should too, and the exact system that I've built around it to benefit from its power without the downsides. So, first things first. Credit dispute overview first. Let's just talk about how this process actually works. And real quick before I do, just know that I do not make anything from telling you to dispute your credit report yourself. And honestly, that may be why this process isn't talked about that much online. But I personally just wanted to make you all aware of this in case it does fit your needs like it does mine. But yeah, the credit dispute process is technically not a credit hack. It's a consumer right, but for all practical purposes, it works exactly like a repair system. You send in a dispute, the bureau reviews the item, contacts the furnisher, and then either verifies, updates, or removes it. And there are zero fees associated with doing it yourself. That means no monthly maintenance fees, no minimum subscription requirements, nothing so. If you looked at this from a pure credit repair standpoint, it already checks basically every box. But here's where it gets more interesting, because you actually have a choice in how your dispute is handled while that negative item sits there. And that choice matters quite a bit. So, I'm going to walk you through both options. Disputing through the credit bureaus option 1 is disputing through the credit bureaus, and this should be the default option most people select when they start. And it is the one that most people go with. Having your dispute sent directly to Experian, Equifax, or TransUnion, or what I'll call the bureaus for the rest of this. Now, I know the term credit dispute may sound a bit confusing at first, but it's really not. I'll get technical first for a second, and then kind of break it down more simply. But a credit dispute is basically a request for the bureau to investigate the accuracy, completeness, and verifiability of an account that appears on your report. And they're basically designed to review supporting information, contact the company reporting the debt, and determine whether the account should remain exactly as is. In layman's terms, though, which is what I would need, a credit dispute is basically just a really low-cost process that forces bad information to prove itself. Back to how this process operates as a whole, though. When you submit your dispute to the bureau, they will automatically open an investigation for you if you selected this option 1. And when they finish, whether that means correcting a balance, deleting a duplicate, or updating a late payment, the bureau will automatically reflect that change on your report. In practice, though, that means that the bureau literally takes care of the review once the dispute is in motion. So, you don't have to do every step manually. It just works. I would imagine that some of y'all out there are asking like, why would we want this over just waiting for the item to fall off though? Well, one of the benefits of disputing through the bureaus, and specifically starting there, is that it can improve your report much sooner if something is inaccurate. But this isn't the measly, like just wait 7 years approach that most people settle for, or really any passive approach that the average person uses. Currently, one deleted collection or one corrected late payment can make a real difference in your score. Can you beat that with other repair methods? Yeah, of course. But getting a score jump from fixing an error on your report is one of the most powerful moves you can make. To put that into real numbers here for you too, if one account is dragging your score down 40, 60, even 100 points, that could mean a massive difference in approvals, interest rates, and access to credit. And comparing that to doing absolutely nothing on that same account would be the difference between staying stuck and actually moving forward. That is the type of gap that we're talking about here. Like I said a second ago, the way that this can create such a big difference is because the system forces the reporting to be accurate. But it all just boils down to cleaner data on your credit report. So, we're just going to leave it at that. How I manage my credit reports before we move to option 2. I want to tell you all about the system that I use to manage a different side of my personal credit life. My reports, balances, due dates, and score changes. A good credit monitoring setup is an all-in-one system that allows you to track all of the important information about all of your accounts, no matter what issuer they come from, in one convenient interface. This is super helpful if you're somebody that has multiple credit cards with different balances, utilization levels, due dates, score updates, and negative items that you would generally need to switch between different lenders' apps to see. One of my most used parts of that setup would be tracking utilization and report changes. Because through this, not only can you see the exact card that's hurting you the most, but it will also tell you when a balance spikes or when an account changes, which just takes out all of the guesswork. There are a ton of other useful things too, like being able to track activity across all your cards, as well as keeping an eye on score movement with each bureau. But I've personally spent the most time using that system to spot errors before they become bigger problems. Also, the account history side is one that I use to make sure all of my trade lines are giving me accurate reporting long term, which I also combine with regular personal information review that serves, the same purpose. There are so many parts of a good credit monitoring system that I could make a whole video on it, but if you want to build one for yourself, just make sure you can see all 3 bureaus, all of your balances, and all recent changes in one place. And big picture, that alone makes the dispute process way more effective. As always, let's jump back into it. Disputing directly with the furnisher now. Option 2 is disputing directly with the furnisher. And the first thing that you'll notice here is that this route is usually a bit slower and more hands-on than option 1. So why would anybody ever choose that one? Well, the big answer is additional protection. While bureau disputes are easier to start, they're not always the strongest route if the response comes back weak. And for those interested in the difference between those, it's that a bureau dispute goes to the credit bureau, while a furnisher dispute goes directly to the creditor, collector, or company that is reporting the account. Interestingly, a furnisher dispute can actually be more useful in stubborn cases though, and that's because you're forcing the actual source of the reporting to answer for it, and that brings a different kind of pressure into the process, which obviously is a big reason that people would choose this option too if they want the strongest paper trail possible at the cost of a little more effort. How safe is the dispute process? I would think that you, just like myself, are probably going to be going with option 1. But I did want to make you aware of both in case you're dealing with a very stubborn account like that. But one question you may have about credit disputes is, since they aren't a magic delete button, how effective are they really? There's actually a term for what can go wrong with a dispute that I'll explain really quickly, and it's called filing a weak or frivolous dispute. A good example of this is when somebody sends vague template letters, no documentation, and no real reason the item is wrong. However, here's the important part. That does not mean the process itself doesn't work. Strong disputes tied to wrong balances, wrong dates, mixed files, duplicate accounts, or unverifiable reporting are about as solid of a repair target as you can get. So, while the risk technically exists here, it is extremely common for results to improve once the dispute becomes more specific and better documented. Why you shouldn't dispute everything. Another thing definitely worth noting about the credit dispute process as a whole is that since it is a repair tool, you can technically dispute a lot of things inside of it. But most people don't do this, and I would probably recommend against it. And here's why. Remember how I said that the bureaus will investigate whatever you challenge? Well, that only works when the account actually has something wrong with it. So, if you start disputing every account on your report blindly, those are not part of a strong strategy, and the bureaus are not automatically going to remove them to cover whatever you challenged. You would have to manually prove why the item is inaccurate, wait for the investigation, and then follow up if needed, which completely defeats kind of the whole purpose of this process, acting like a clean repair system. So, the move that most people make, and what I do myself, is keeping the dispute process as a pure accuracy tool, and then using separate strategies like goodwill letters, utilization fixes, or pay for delete negotiations for everything else. That way, both of those approaches are going to have a clear job, and nothing gets in the way of the dispute process working how it's intended to. Personal information cleanup, one of the more underrated parts of the credit dispute process, and one that speaks to me personally as I guess credit enthusiast you could call me. Sounds kind of weird, but if you know my channel, you know that's technically true, is cleaning up the personal information section of your credit report. And more specifically, the benefit that removing old addresses, name variations, and outdated employment details can provide. The most important one is that it can make your report more consistent before you challenge anything. Most people out there are either going to ignore personal information entirely or limit themselves to only looking at the account line itself. So, that perk alone makes this process really competitive. To be fair, again, y'all know I'm all about score improvement. So I don't even remember the last time I reviewed a credit report without checking the personal information section too. And in the past, I've always treated that as more of an afterthought. So the question that I had was, could I actually use that cleanup step the same way? Like, does it have that same benefit for the rest of the process? And after going through a lot of report details to find this, and I'm not sure why more people don't make this more readily available, it turns out that cleaning up old personal information first can absolutely make your disputes more organized. That means that I can actually remove extra confusion before I send anything out. And as somebody who likes consolidating systems and keeping things as simple as possible, that's good news. I will note, though, the one thing to watch out for. And this applies to any dispute letter or document that you send, is that if they offer to process things faster through a weak online form with very little documentation, you should be careful with that. Not only because you should be building a stronger paper trail like the ones we've been talking about, but also because a sloppy submission will generally lock you into a weak result. So I would always recommend just keeping copies of your ID, proof of address, statements, and supporting documents instead to not have to worry about that. Overall, though, for people who regularly monitor their reports or are preparing for a major loan, this cleanup step alone could save you a lot of frustration and be worth starting the entire process for. How I use the credit dispute process. So, now that we've covered what this process is and like what it comes with, let me tell you how I actually use it, because I think that's, the most valuable part of this video. As you would know if you watched my recent credit repair videos, I focus first on the fast score wins. But a significant chunk of my repair workflow, I would say like roughly 30%, lives in the dispute and documentation side. And the reason it's there might surprise you, because it's not really about chasing random deletions. Don't get me wrong, I'm definitely not complaining about the score gains that can come from fixing a bad account. especially with how big the savings can get from better approvals and lower interest rates. Like we're talking meaningful changes in real borrowing costs. But the real, and I would say more competitive reason that I keep effort in this process comes down to what I can fix with it when I need to move quickly. See, I have a lot of other score factors beyond just one negative item. These days, that means utilization, payment history, account age, inquiries, and collections all sitting within the same profile. So, having a dispute system in place means that any reporting error inside of that file is just one organized challenge away. No need to wait around for years, no hoping it works itself out, and no more wondering what to do first. But here's the part that I really want to highlight because I don't think enough people talk about this. As somebody who is serious about keeping my credit clean, I'm responsible for setting aside my own time to review my reports throughout the year. So, what I do is I keep copies of all 3 reports, highlight any account that looks wrong, and let that documentation sit there organized until I need it. And then every time I need to challenge something, of course, I just pull it from that report file and send it through the proper channel. And then come application time, whatever damage is left over in that report that I didn't resolve earlier in the year, I can immediately focus on before I go for a mortgage, auto loan, or premium card, and whether that's a bureau dispute, a furniture dispute, or a goodwill letter, it doesn't matter. It just moves instantly with no friction. And that right there is genuinely something that you cannot replicate as cleanly if your credit repair is scattered across random notes and rushed actions. Does that extra few days worth of organization really matter in the grand scheme of things? No, not always. But it's hard to describe how nice it is to have that cohesiveness. And I guess I need to say this, but obviously none of this is legal advice by any means, and your credit situation is your own. But that workflow alone of keeping my report reviews, documentation, and disputes organized has made this really valuable for me personally. Important notes may be more applicable to you, though, is the fact that if you wanted to, you can even set up recurring reminders to review your credit report on a set schedule, which completely takes the effort out of staying on top of your file. And if you want to get even more organized, you can keep multiple folders for free and then bucket out different repair goals in each of them, like collections, late payments, personal information updates, or mortgage prep. And maybe for you, that's your home loan coming up, your car loan, whatever it is. So really, the world is your oyster with that. And another smaller thing that I wanted to mention here is that depending on what state of your credit file you're in, the score gain from correcting a bad item may actually be bigger than you expect. And that's because removing or updating one inaccurate account can improve much more than just one line on a report. So, your effective score improvement from using this process can actually be higher than what you first imagined depending on where your profile stands. With all that said though, I do still recommend keeping strong credit habits open alongside this process like I do with on-time payments and low balances. That is not an area to stop caring about at all. The only reason I would recommend you do this is because there's no way to directly repair your credit long-term if you keep adding fresh late payments and high balances while you're trying to clean up the old damage. So, bottom line, for my strategy at least, the dispute process is not meant to replace everything necessarily, although it could if you use it very well. For most of us, it's a specific tool with a specific job, and if you use it that way, it's really hard to beat. Downsides of the credit dispute process, it'd be wrong of me to leave this conversation, though, without bringing up the downsides of this process, because it isn't all sunshine and rainbows. The first one is one that we just covered a second ago. And it's one of the most legitimate ones on this list, and that's that there is no way to use disputes to erase accurate information just because you don't like it. So, you may need to keep open other repair strategies alongside this one if you need that flexibility, which most of us do. But like I said, hopefully you can find other methods that have no downside for your situation, like utilization reduction, goodwill letters, or simply building more positive history. That way you don't have to keep all of your hope inside one tactic, losing out on the possible score gains that a complete plan could be earning instead. The next one is one that the keyboard warriors probably already commented about, and that's that the dispute process is not going to compete with fake overnight promises from scammy credit repair pages. But the law behind this process has been around for decades. It's one of the most established consumer protections in the country. And for files with specific reporting problems like duplicates, mixed information, or wrong statuses in this case, that gap probably isn't worth thinking about. But even if you did have a more complex file, the peace of mind that comes with a real paper trail and an organized system starts to matter a lot more anyways. So again, that con may be kind of canceled out by the legitimacy of the process. On the same note, the next downside, if you can even call it that, is that your results are variable. So just like all score changes, it's going to move with the broader condition of your report, meaning that what you see today in your file is not guaranteed tomorrow. And when the item is accurate or the documentation is weak, the result may be near zero as well, but so is everything else. So the point here is that yes, the outcome is variable, but it's always going to be tied to the quality of what you're challenging. You're just not locked into any one number. The next one is that the dispute process doesn't natively support being lazy, which I know for some people is a deal breaker right off the bat, at least when it comes to using this for all of their credit repair needs. But there are workarounds that I've seen people use, including certified mail, tracking systems, and document folders. So this is more of a minor inconvenience than anything, but definitely still something to note. There's also some inconsistency with online dispute forms. And for those that don't know, those are the systems that a lot of people use to connect to the bureaus quickly. So anything like fast submissions or simple account challenges, stuff like that. And what I've seen is that some people prefer mail disputes because they create a stronger paper trail than the quick online method. So, I would say that claim is real and verifiable, but that doesn't really matter to me personally if the documentation itself is bad. And then lastly, there is no in-person miracle with credit repair. If walking into one office and getting everything fixed the same day is something that you need or value, then this isn't the process for you. As you've probably seen, the bureaus do have systems, but they aren't a traditional service that can just sit down and manually rebuild your file for you. So, it's not the same vibe. So yeah, there are a few things to be aware of, but I don't think any of these should scare you off. And for most people, the combination of everything else that we talked about today is going to more than make up for these minor friction points that this process has. You know, I've been using this style of workflow for quite a while, and I can't think of any more downsides that I've faced with it. But as time goes on, and the more that I get familiar with it, I'll definitely, make an updated video if I feel like I need to. But if you're somebody watching this and you're looking to either compare or combine this process with other credit repair strategies, then I'd highly recommend you click into this video next, where I break down the best ones right now. And as always, I really appreciate you watching. If you enjoyed, consider leaving a like, subscribing to the channel, and checking out all the links in my description so we can eat tonight. And with that said, we'll catch you guys next.